HanselMinutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan, announcing show number 187, recorded live Wednesday, November 11th, 2009. Support for Hansel Minutes is provided by Telerik RAD Controls, the most comprehensive suite of components for Windows Forms and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.telerik.com. In this episode, Scott talks with software tester James Bach.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes, and I'm still in Sweden, here at Öredev in Malmö, Sweden, and I've got the opportunity to sit down with James Bach. James, you may have heard his name. He is a consulting software tester and the author of 2 books and a contributor to a number of books. He wrote Lessons Learned in Software Testing and most recently wrote Secrets of a Buccaneer-Scholar. Thank you, sir, for sitting down with me today.
Glad to be here.
So, Secrets of a Buccaneer-Scholar, that doesn't seem as clear to me as the title Lessons Learned in Software Testing. I think I know what I'm going to get from one of the books. What am I going to get from a Buccaneer-Scholar book with a hyphen in between Buccaneer and Scholar?
Well, it's about an aggressive sort of self-education that I've been involved with since I dropped out of high school back in 1982. And it's basically the secret to whatever success I have in this industry. And I wanted to tell people about this methodology I use.
So back up. You dropped out of high school and you never went back. You don't have a GED?
I don't have a GED. I have no formal education past past 10th grade.
Does that just mean you have natural software talent?
Well, what happened, I guess, like a lot of kids, my father bought me an Apple II computer just before I was kicked out of home when I was 14, and I went to live in a motel room with my computer. And I spent a lot of time skipping school and learning how to program in assembly language. And so by the time that I dropped out of school, I went almost immediately into being a video game programmer.
Really? So when did you moved out at 14, when did you finally give up on school?
At 16, as soon as it was legal for me to do so. Although actually it was my father's idea. I was trying to get them to let me skip a grade even though I was failing every class. And he said, why didn't you just leave? And I said, I'm allowed to do that? Well, I didn't realize. I'm going to raise my sights. And he told me something which at the time I didn't think was serious. He said, you should just take care of your own education and not expect anyone else to do it. And I thought, well, that's weird. What does that mean? Take care of your own education? Because at that time, like so many people around the world, in the industrialized world, I thought of education as equal to schooling. I thought of it as exactly the same thing. Of course, since then, I realized that education is a vast thing and schooling is a relatively narrow thing. And I have been taking care of my education. But to do that, I had to develop methods of doing that allow me to deal with my particular disabilities.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that you use the word, so I'll continue that. Do you think you have a disability as around either a learning disability or a school-specific disability?
I have no self-discipline. I maybe have a little bit of it. I might have traces of it. But basically, unlike a lot of people, I seem to have no ability to learn things when other people tell me I have to, or to do things when other people tell me I have to, above basic safety type things. My teachers would say you should read this, and I'd go, I don't feel like reading that.
Isn't that just disdain for authority? Isn't that separate from an inability?
I think that's what it
inability is not unwillingness.
Well, I seem to not be able to overcome it even when it would be in my best economic interests to do so. So that's where it moves into kind of a disability. I don't think of it as a big time disability. It's just, it's an attribute of me that I've had to learn to work with. And when I realized it was very, very serious was when I was 12 and I'd been going through this war with the school authorities about homework. I refused to do homework because of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which says there shall be no slavery in the United States. And I looked at that and I said, that means I don't have to do homework. And they said, that's not what it means. And I'm like, I'm reading it. It says involuntary servitude. This is involuntary servitude. I have not been convicted of a crime. It says unless you've been convicted of a crime. So we had this big fight. and they used all kinds of psychology tactics to try to break me down. And the thing is that the psychology tactics worked. Eventually, I was crushed. I was crushed emotionally. I was terribly depressed.
Well, you're 12. I mean, 12 is not an adult.
Oh, yeah. It was absolutely. I was so many things happened to me when I was 12 that basically seemed to define my life later on. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. I will do the homework. I give up. And then I discovered a horrifying thing. When I discovered it, I think horrifying is the right word. My mind was still on strike. Even though my executive will was saying, let's do the homework, my mind would refuse to read anything on the page. So I would try to read on the page and it would instantly disappear from my mind as if I had some sort of short-term memory disability. And I tried again and I tried again. And finally I realized I couldn't force my mind to work on things that it, for whatever secret reasons of its own, didn't want to think about. And up to that moment in my life, I assumed that I was of one mind, that I get to choose what I do and we all work together, all the little neurons. And I realized that I actually have several different identity centers or something. And so ever since then, I've learned that I have to treat my thinking mind like a pet tiger. And if I don't treat it right, it runs off into the forest. And indeed, several times in my career, before I figured out how to do this, I experienced a deep burnout. Once I experienced such a burnout that I was not able to read any email. I got email phobia. And another time I got such a deep burnout that I would be physically sick if I sat down at a keyboard. And all these were from trying to push myself so hard. And what I had to learn is to pace myself. And a big part of growing up for me in my 30s was learning what my limitations were, learning what the signs are when my brain is trying to say, no, I don't want to do that anymore. And what that's meant is that I've had to do all kinds of innovative things. They look innovative to people from the outside, but I know that they look innovative because I've gotten good at featuring what I can't help but do anyway. So for instance, I read 5 books on Darwin a couple months ago. I wasn't supposed to read 5 books on Darwin. I was supposed to be doing something else, but I was interested in reading about Darwin. So I just got absorbed. And ever since then, I've been trying to find connections between Darwin and testing so that I can teach my testing classes and people can go, how inventive. He's related to Darwin and his approaches to analysis and experimentation to software testing. What an innovative thing to do.
Is that innovative or is that artificially innovative?
Well, what I'm saying is it is kind of artificially innovative. It's something I couldn't help but do. And so I'm trying to find a way to make it, useful.
To make it productive time.
To make it productive time retrospectively. I did that in my talk today. I did some playing around with things that I didn't need to learn, a year ago and learned about something called simulated annealing. And then last night at 3 a.m., I realized that what I'd learned about simulated annealing exactly fit into a point I wanted to make about efficiency in software testing. And so I was able to take that stuff that I had done that was a waste of my time a year ago, and now, retrospectively, it's not a waste of my time.
That's interesting. I might get nailed by my readers on this because whenever I try to use my own, try to Google my own brain here. But was it Richard Feynman that wrote a book called Consilience that was all about how
I don't think it was Feynman. I think it's a different guy. I'm familiar with the book.
And the idea is that there are silos of knowledge. There's your sociology class and there's your geography class and there's your anthropology class. And to look at them in that way, conditions the mind not to make those connections between them as being completely related. Exactly. The idea that everything is truly and completely related. I think you're right. It's not Feynman, but I think the book was called Consilience. And the idea was that you need to have a much more holistic view of the entire world as all things are just, there are patterns that are valuable to be looking for and that, all true innovation comes from recognition of those patterns.
I think so, or I think enough of it is true that I can make use of it. And therefore about 7-8 years ago, I was making an argument about some new test technique I was playing with to my friend who has 2 doctorates, Kem Kaner, who's a professor at Florida Tech, and he said, well, that's obvious to you, James, because you have an unconventional education, but most people wouldn't be interested in that. And I said, well, that's interesting. Maybe I should write a book about that.
Yeah.
An original title was, You Too Can Get an Unconventional Education, or It's Not Too Late to Have an Unconventional Education. And I began to explore things like what you just mentioned, which is not to say that a conventional education is a useless thing, but I was trying to think, what are the advantages of an unconventional education that a conventionally educated person might benefit from as well, and maybe make themselves more powerful? So actually, I've been writing this book for 26 years and in different forms, and that most recent attempt, starting about 7 years ago, was the one that developed into the final version that I ended up publishing.
Now, it's interesting. I listened to an episode of Fresh Air recently. Fresh Air, for those of you who are international listeners, is an interview show a lot like this that's got a much wider reach and talks to a lot of different kinds of people. And one of the people on the show was a high school educated, I think he was a plumber. And he started playing with particle physics and string theory and basically decided that E equals MC squared was wrong and wrote the whole thing up. And he went on this very quixotic quest to determine that with his unconventional education, that all of modern physics was wrong at this fundamental point. And on the show, that basically they took him around to different professors and they introduced him around, and it became clear that he was just flat wrong, but he wouldn't accept it. When you have an unconventional education, how do you know when you are just wrong because of some missing bit of knowledge versus being able to actually go and fill that gap in your brain?
Well, how do you know that when you have a conventional education? I don't think anybody knows that.
Peer pressure or societal inertia, perhaps? I mean,
well,
if
that
everyone
doesn't tell me
believes
that doesn't tell me if I'm right or wrong. If everyone believes it, or if no one believes it, then that has nothing to do with.
But does that mean that you have to do every single experiment? I mean, do you have to go and rub the 2 balloons together to make sure static electricity works the way you think it does? I mean, that would mean you'd have to spend the next.
I would do that if I wanted to have a deep understanding of static electricity. Then I would reproduce Faraday's experiments, and I would benefit from doing that. However, when I say that I have an unconventional education, that doesn't mean that I don't read or I don't learn. I mean, I learn from all kinds of sources. What I mean by that is that I don't accept anyone else's authority. That's where the Buccaneer and Buccaneer-Scholar comes from. I don't accept anyone else's authority over my education. I definitely use all kinds of resources. In fact, in 1990, I hired a history professor from San Jose State to push me through some history stuff that I was having trouble getting myself to go through. And so I paid him $45 an hour to sit in a coffee shop and listen to me talk about the thing that he suggested that I read. And because he worked for me, and because I didn't want to waste my $45, I did the reading.
You hired a personal trainer.
I hired a personal trainer in history. That's exactly right. And he told me at the time, he said, oh, you should go to San Jose State. We've got a 2-year humanities program. And I said, well, I don't want to do that. And he said, oh, no, it's just for you. You would love it. And I'm like, okay, I guess so. I mean, if you're doing it, I guess so. See, I'm not against the concept of schooling. I'm against the concept of school removing your ownership of your own education.
Hey, everybody, this is Scott coming at you from another place and time. No doubt you probably bump into testing tasks now and then in your work. And writing functional tests is probably not your favorite thing. It's kind of difficult, takes time, and the results can be dubious. Well, get ready to start liking tests thanks to Telerik with the new WebEye testing framework. Building web automation tests is a breeze. You've got code automation with advanced ASP.NET AJAX and Silverlight applications. You can write a single test, have it executed against multiple browsers at once. You benefit from a rich API. There's link support, integration with Visual Studio unit testing, also NUnit, XUnit, and MBUnit. Not to mention the free wrappers for Telerik RAD controls for ASP.NET AJAX and Silverlight, all shipping with Telerik's new testing tool. One of the best features, the WebEye testing framework, which is developed by Art of Test, is it's absolutely free. If you've already got hooked on WebEye testing framework, start using it right away. Go to Telerik.com for more info. Thanks a lot. This thing makes me, I've got 2 young kids, and this makes me think about the difference between conventional education and what they call Montessori education, kind of letting the child to be a little more self-directed.
Have you done Montessori?
I haven't. We've just visited the schools. I
Okay.
have friends that swear by it, but it makes me feel like some people learn some ways and some people don't. I mean, some kids
Yes.
thrive in a Montessori school, and some
Absolutely.
kids thrive just fine in a conventional school.
Absolutely. You know what? It's like a game, and some people are just good at some games and not so good at others. I'm very good at taking tests. That's a game I just enjoyed being tested, and I like sitting down and taking the quiz. Other people are very upset and tense when they take tests, and otherwise they're
See, that's funny. When I went into my college, what do you call it? The counselor, the college counselor. So I'm in high school.
Yeah.
I've taken the SATs, and then the college counselor says, your SAT scores and your grades are not congruous, right? You have these low grades and this high SAT score. You've been hanging out for the last 4 years. And of course, they always say this with some disdain. Like, what are you doing? Well,
you're an underachiever.
I'm having a great time. Well, I obviously I'm not an underachiever. I have the test scores that show that I'm at least good at taking tests. So I got that going for me. So it sounds like you were probably flunking out of classes and not doing your homework, but when they tested you, you were doing fine.
Well, I actually got in a physical, fight with one of my teachers who was so offended that I wouldn't show up to his class. And, I was a troublesome child, that's for sure. But what I didn't understand at the time, but was true at the time, is that if a teacher approached me with respect, they would own me. They could get me to do anything they wanted me to do. There was a teacher she was a substitute teacher, and she also was the sort of the policewoman of the bouncer of study hall, and she had a bad reputation of being always upset and angry. And somehow she decided I was okay, and she asked me to do the sound of this for the school play. And I still remember that to this day, because it was the very first time it dawned on me that I could organize my thoughts and complete a project. And she got me to do that by asking me nicely, and I felt like I wanted to perform for her. Mm-hmm. And other teachers would, if I didn't do just what they said, or if I bucked them in any way or thought critically about what they were saying, they would say, well, you have to do this. And I'd say, screw you. Mm-hmm. No, I don't. You watch me. I won't even show up to your class, or I'll intentionally fail the test that you give me. How about that? Mm-hmm. And they would just go nuts. They thought I was this incorrigible youth. And even I didn't understand at the time why some teachers I would do things for and other teachers I wouldn't. I certainly could have stayed in school or gone to school in different ways if I had been exposed to the right kinds of adults who led me along. And in fact, although I describe myself as self-educated, it's more accurate to say I'm mentor-educated. My first boss at the video game company taught me to drive, got me to learn to play the harmonica. We would jog together. He taught me all about professional coding and why you can't have little flickers and nasty looking stuff on the screen. I said, oh, they can hardly see that flicker. And he said, do it over. And he brought all this, my first sense of what professionalism was to me. And so he was a big part of my education. My first boss at Apple taught me tremendous things about professionalism above and beyond that. I wish I could find this guy. If you're out there, Chris Brown, who was leader of the Development Systems Quality Group in 1987, contact me.
It sounds like you have almost a respect-driven education.
That's what it is. You know what it is, and this is what I wrote about in the book. I don't have self-discipline so much. What I operate on is passion. I operate on heart. It's feelings. It's the feeling that my work is needed by somebody that drives me forward. And anytime I find myself in a situation that I don't feel needed, my motivation completely collapses. And that's one reason why I'm an independent. I worked for other companies for years, but for the last 10 years, I work for myself, and I wait for clients to come to me who say, James Bach, we've read your stuff. We've seen what you do. We want what you do. And then I go, yes. And I'm ready to be super motivated for them.
So how can those things that are clearly working for you be applied to other people? Let me give you an example. I was driven over here from the hotel by a very nice young man, and I was chatting him up in the car, and I said, so what do you do? And he says, oh, I'm a software engineer. Oh, really? Well, where do you work? Well, I'm unemployed right now. I'm driving this car. And he said, well, if I can't get a job by next summer, I'm going to go back and get my master's degree. And I hear that kind of constantly where it's like, I'm going to just peek my head out from school for a moment. If I can't get a job, then I'm going to duck down again and maybe try again later.
Because look what they're doing. When you say, I'm going to get a master's degree, all you're basically saying is, I want to now compete with a slightly smaller, huge group of people who are identical to me. Instead of saying, how can I feature myself as someone unique? And here's the thing. When I became a tester at Apple Computer, I hadn't heard of testing before that. I did my own testing, right, as a developer. So I thought I knew about testing and I'd never studied it. And I realized I needed to study, and I studied really hard, and I started feeling like I was kind of good at it. And I looked around there were 400 other testers at Apple Computer in the group at the time. And I realized I seemed to be only one of about a dozen people who were even trying to study this subject. And I realized that maybe all these other people that all had college degrees thought that their education was done. And I felt mine wasn't done, so I was able to just zing by them. Now, why was I interested in doing this and they weren't? I think maybe I had fallen into testing as something that happens to really fit what I love, how I love to think. It just naturally fits my complainy, lateral thinking, critical thinking type of personality. I'm always trying to think of an exception to a rule.
How to break it, how to get around it.
How to get around it. It's kind of a hacker mentality, I guess. And so I really fit in testing. So whereas some people were trying to excel at testing when their heart wasn't in it, I had found something that my heart was attracted to. So lots of energy was liberated for me to work on this. What you need to do if you are a conventionally educated person, I think, is you need to discover, and this is the tough thing in life, but we have all our 20s pretty much to do it, discover what it is, what mix of activities makes you super excited that you want to do. And then if you go into that field, you will be able to compete regardless of your level of formal education. You'll be able to compete like gangbusters because you'll be surrounded by people who were mostly pushed into there by their parents or by their peers, or they don't know what else to do. And you will be able to run right by them like they're standing still. And you develop your reputation. And we can do that in the modern world much more easily because we have all blogs now, free blogs that I didn't have back in my day. And you develop your portfolio. You post examples of your work online.
Your personal brand.
Your personal brand, exactly. So that's basically what I talk about in the book, is how I developed my personal brand. And what's amazing to me is I heard from a guy with 12 years experience in testing, and he said he had to get ISTQB certified, and there's no choice. He has to do it. And I said, I'm not ISTQB certified. And he said, yes, but you're the famous James Bach. Right. But when I had 12 years experience, I could have done the same thing. And when I had 6 years and 2 years experience, I mean, I wasn't always famous as a software tester. I became famous by being passionate and developing my personal brand.
So there's a popular blogger, Jeff Atwood, who writes codinghorror.com, and he talks about that he's not a particularly talented software programmer. He admits that. But he has, 120,000 people a day that read his blog. So he says, what I lack in talent, I make up for with intensity. Is that what you're saying? I mean, someone
Yes.
could take a cynical view and say, well, the passionate person will win over the maybe more trained, more intelligent, but dispassionate individual.
Oh, that may very well happen. And there are also many situations, it turns out, where people run away from passionate people. They're frightened of them. But as I say in the book, I don't need everybody to hire me. I just need a few people to hire me, maybe even one at a time. And so there's a whole world out there that can discover me. And it's okay that my spicy Tabasco brand of thinking, where I'm constantly calling bullshit on people instead of accepting what most people believe, absolutely, it doesn't work for a lot of folks. Hey, there's a lot of folks at Microsoft who complain about the things that I do. It doesn't work for them. But there are lots of people who take me seriously and think that I've got good things to say. And I pretty much ignore people who don't like what I have to offer, and pretty much focus on the people who need what I have to offer, and just feature that. And I think we're all like that. We all have a balance of attributes, a basket of attributes in us, and a basket of things that we want to develop, we want to spend our time doing. Some people are more meticulous than others. Some people have a lot more charm and people skills than I do. And I want to work with those people. They're always very comfortable to work with. But I'm not like that. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to compete with them on that basis.
So are you saying that part of your process was figuring out what your weaknesses were and how to downplay them, or are you a person who downplays the weakness and works to the strength? Other people say, well, you really need to work on the weakness and make it a strength.
Right. What I found both as a manager and just personally, I found that I need to, maybe I work on the weaknesses a little bit, but basically I downplay them. And instead of trying to practice being quiet, I try to look for situations where a loud guy is needed. My wife recruited me to be her husband because she's an introvert and she wanted an extrovert to be her bodyguard. And I enjoy playing that role. I'm her bodyguard. And every time we go to the doctor, I'm like her lawyer and talks to the doctor so she doesn't have to argue with the doctor. And she needs to talk to somebody on the phone who's giving her a hard time. She passes the phone over to me, and I'm the guy who's the bad cop. And she gets to be the, soft cop and the friendly person who smooths things over after I leave them in shambles. And it works for us.
Yeah.
And she does all the finances and she does all the paperwork because she's good at that. And I'm not meticulous enough, for that. And I work on the big ideas and speaking in public and all this. And we complement each other very well. So I like to downplay. I'm 43 now. There are weaknesses that I have that I'm just don't think I'm going to get over. I just rather focus on what my strengths are.
Well, they always say that when you're out there and you have a lot of emotional baggage, the trick is to find people whose emotional baggage matches yours.
There you go.
Whether it be a company or an industry or in that case, a wife.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you try to work against that, at least for me, it goes, I'll burn out. I will go through a self-destructive kind of experience. So I have to avoid that.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the really concrete things that someone can take away from this? It sounds like there are a series of life lessons and stories. Are there techniques within
absolutely.
The book that the listeners can apply?
So a whole
in their
set
life?
of heuristics that I offer, and I try to break down what I do into 11 different elements. And sometimes people read it and they think what I'm saying is do these 11 things and you too will be successful.
So it's not a cookbook.
It's not a cookbook, and I'm not saying you too will be successful if you do these things. What I'm saying is that if you happen to be either the sort of person who has always struggled to play the same kind of game, that a conventional thinking game that everyone else is trying to play, and it's not being successful for you, maybe you're a different kind of mind, the Buccaneer type of mind like me, and maybe these elements will be helpful to you. If you are a conventional thinking kind of person, but you want to be really great at what you do, maybe these 11 elements might be worth thinking about, because maybe you'll find something in them that you can use to supercharge what you already are good at doing that I don't happen to be good at doing, fitting in and getting along. So for instance, one of the 11 elements is called contrasting ideas, and it relates to my habit of any time I find myself thinking about one practice or one philosophy or one way of organizing the world, I find myself thinking, what's the opposite of that? What would be the thing that was the furthest away from that? And how do I know that's not also a good thing to do? And so I find myself slamming ideas together in my mind. And I love getting to arguments. I love dialectical learning. A lot of people like to avoid arguments and seek common ground, but I seek the potent learning that comes from a strident disagreement. And many times people think I'm angry at them when I'm actually very excited about what they're saying, and I want to test it. So I show them, what about this? What about this? I'm giving them test cases because I want to say, can you pass this test case? And they go, stop yelling at me. I'm like, I'm loving you. This is how I love.
One of the things that one of the many things that my wife hates about me is that we'll have these arguments where I'll take a position. It could be something basic or it could be something political, and we'll fight and we'll fight and we'll fight, and then I'll realize that she's right, and I'll go, oh, okay, well, I totally see your point. So I'll go from this intense kind of like attack mode where we're just really having this great lowercase a argument, and it's very enthusiastic, and I'm really upbeat. And then I go and then I've collected all this great information from her. And I'll go, oh, okay, that's great. And she's like, well, how can you just go from having such a strong opinion to like saying, oh, you're right? And I said, well, it's a strong opinion that's weakly held. I'm completely willing to admit, I believe that
I love that way of saying it.
I believe that gravity, until you prove it, if you proved right now that gravity didn't work, I'd be like, oh, okay, great. And I would be like the most fervent anti-gravity proponent out there.
I like the way you said that. I have a little phrase that's like that. I say, I'm a skeptic, and one of my other elements is skepticism, and skepticism does not mean scoffing, which is a lot of people think it means scoffing. Oh, I don't believe that. What skepticism means in the original sense of Sextus Empiricus and Pyrrho of Elis from back 2,000 years ago, the original skepticism was the spirit of let the inquiry continue. I never know anything for certain. So yes, I'm going to believe things, but I try to sleep lightly on the truth. Strong opinions, lightly held.
Yeah.
Sleep lightly on the truth so that you're wake-upable, right?
Right.
So maybe what your wife was thinking, as a lot of people think, that an argument is a fight. That's what she doesn't understand.
Well, she's so concerned I'm trying to change her mind.
Yeah. Aren't you trying to attack me or change me or manipulate me? Mm-hmm. How come you suddenly stopped? That doesn't make any sense. Really? Well, maybe I wasn't trying to do any of those things, and it just looked like that. But of course, it's hard for folks like us because sometimes we're in our own head doing this and we have no idea that everybody else is terrified of us or intimidated. I was once in a class where we went around the room and people gave words that were associated with conflict. Mm-hmm. And I was amazed because everyone before me was saying pain.
It's so funny.
Suffering.
I just did
humiliation.
That in my head. I said fun.
And I said excitement. That was mine. Excitement. I was the only one in the room who had a positive idea of conflict. See, that's what Buccaneer comes from. It's this, I realized that the historical Buccaneers were aggressive, people, adventurers. They had to master lots of different skills. They considered themselves a free society of people, not just a bunch of pirates. They were a free society trying to make it in a new world where there weren't so many rules. They were like hackers. Mm-hmm. They had left Europe.
They were life hacking.
They were life hacking, having left Europe where it's all cloistered. And they realized that they could steal from these Spanish ships, and they started doing that. And they didn't think of themselves as thieves, though. They thought of themselves as, hey, Spain doesn't really own this stuff anyway. They just stole it from these Indians. So, we'll just steal it from them. And the 17th century Buccaneers, unlike the 18th century Buccaneers, had a social kind of basis as opposed to just being, pirates the way they turned into, later on. And I'm like that. I don't quite fit in, and I do my own thing, and the world can certainly get along without me, and yet there are certain kinds of things that I can offer to the world, just as the Buccaneers were used by the navies of England, the navies of France and Portugal at different times to fight the Spanish. They were like a sort of auxiliary force that was useful. Well, I'm a kind of auxiliary force that sometimes can be used in addition to whatever else they're doing. And so I try to have interesting things to offer people that they might not get anywhere else, and I teach people this way of thinking.
Well, thanks. This has been really fun. I really appreciate it.
It's been really fun for me, Scott.
Well, you can check out James Bach on his website at satisfice.com. I'll add the links to that in the show notes. And
Buccaneer-Scholar.com.
You have Buccaneer-Scholar.com as well. Fantastic. Be sure to check out his books on software testing and his newly released Secrets of a Buccaneer Scholar. Again, thank you so much for your time. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and I'll see you again next week.